Awesome. Welcome everyone. As you're joining, we're just gonna take a minute. We had our uh last Zoom hiccup of this series, and so we're just gonna let folks trickle in before we get started. And in just a moment, I'll go over how to participate in this if you're new. While you're signing on, you can go ahead and put your name and where you're signing in from in the chat, and just in that, make sure that you are typing to everyone rather than just to panelists and hosts. And this has been one of my favorite parts of these webinars because we get to see so many people coming in from all over the place. My analogy has been it's kind of like watching the screen. I grew up in the Northeast where we'd get snow days and we'd watch on the TV the little screens of all the districts that were closed, just like trickling across the screen. And currently our little chat box is that. It's like all the names of people coming in. Awesome. So welcome. If this is your first virtual workshop with Bikepacking Roots, this is the 8th and final of an 8-part series we started way back in November. I would imagine a lot of you are tuning back in. And if so, thanks for joining us. And if you are new, thanks for coming because this is going to be a great one. Like I said, you can go ahead and put your name and where you're from in the chat. Make sure that you do select the to everyone field. It's easy. Some folks have it defaulted to just panelists, and then only I get to see you and Noelle and Leah if they're looking at it. Throughout the workshop, as you come up with questions, you can put those questions in the Q&A part of the Zoom panel. If you do put them in the chat, there's a chance I'll catch them, but it's the easiest way to keep track of questions is if they're in the Q&A. In the chat, you can feel free to engage with the content, share your experiences. That's been one of the highlights so far, is just seeing people engage with the content throughout the workshop. And that chat will be a living document. It'll get saved and emailed out to everyone who registered for this workshop. So do please keep it on topic. Our guest speaker, Leah, will take pauses in between sections throughout. So we will pause for questions probably twice before the final Q&A. I will feed her questions that you all send to me through the Q&A, and I'll try to be asking the questions that are maybe the most relevant to that section. And then we'll hopefully have time to cover the rest of them at the end. And if not, then some questions might have to be followed up with afterwards. Lastly, maybe one of the most popular questions is what happens with the recording? It will get emailed out. You will get an email from Noelle with this recording. You will also get all the past recordings at some point, and that'll come within the next week. Without any further ado, just want to welcome you to this final workshop with Bikepacking Roots. This has been an introduction to bikepacking series, and this final workshop will be about mechanics and fixing mechanicals in the field while out bikepacking. This series has been put on by Bikepacking Roots, made free and possible to all participants who have access to Zoom through the generous sponsorship of Ride with GPS, Redvolate Designs, and Shimano. Bikepacking Roots is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to bikepacking and bikepacking community and the landscape that we ride through. If you want to join us in our work and helping us achieve our mission, you can join as a member and support our work that way. And after this series, we will wrap up with just some final announcements. But without any further ado on these fronts, I'm excited to introduce Leah Fantle of Upshift Workshop, who is going to take it from here. And we're going to do a brief screen share end, and she's going to take it.
Give me 1 second to get this set up. I'm less versed in Zoom as some might be. Give me 1 second. Oh, post has disabled participant screen sharing. Oh, we might I might not be able to share my screen.
Here, let me make sure who can share. Okay,
Otherwise,
can you try it now?
here we go. Wonderful. We love it.
Perfect. I'll Zoom. Who knew bikepackers would take on Zoom?
Here we go. Slideshow time. Let's give it 1 minute to load. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Leah Fantle, and I am a bicycle mechanic and educator based in Washington, D.C. I run a mobile bike repair workshop, an education workshop called Upshift, Upshift Workshop or Upshift DC here in the city, and also get to do I travel around I've gotten to have opportunity to travel around the country and around the world, working as a travel mechanic at various points. I got into bike mechanics originally all the way probably about like 9 or 10 years ago, just kind of as a bike commuter around the city, and having a low budget, being right out of college and wanting to be able to fix my own repairs, fix my own problems on my bike. And kind of learned a little bit on the fly. My background originally is in bicycle advocacy. I've kind of got into bicycles through an advocacy lens, back in like 2014, with an internship that started at the Alliance for Biking and Walking, and just fell head over heels for bikes, and their potential as community builders and good for the environment, good for our mental and physical health and all that goodness. And started working at bike shops to learn more about the industry, and then have been now working as a mechanic. I found that I love working my hands, and got into working as a mechanic over the last, like 8, 9 years. And it's been really amazing. I've worked for a lot of local bike shops here in DC, here in the DC area, whether they're on the normal brick and mortar front, or a couple of our nonprofit shops teaching Earn a Bike programs in schools and teaching Learn to Ride. I'm a certified mechanic. I had was privileged to receive the QBP Quality Bike Bicycle Products Women's Mechanic Scholarship back in 2018, and got to go to bike school in Oregon, with a class of amazing other women, trans, and femme folks. Through that opportunity, just was inspired to kind of I learned a lot about like just myself and the potential of bike mechanics, to really have basically have be able to I'm just losing my train of thought, but basically I'm just excited to be here. And I'm also certified as a cycling instructor through the League of American Bicyclists and I'm an LCI, and I get to teach people how to ride and teach mechanics through my work here in the city. Through one of my first bike mechanic jobs, I always have had an interest in trying to build community in bicycles, and from the start of me getting into biking in the city, I always have wanted to use bikes as a way to get out of the city. And here in DC, we're privileged to have the CNO Canal Trail that leaves right out of the heart of DC in Georgetown, and takes you as far as you want to go, all the way to Pittsburgh if you want. 350 miles entirely on gravel, connecting to the Gap Trail up there. And I've used that trail. I think the first years I got into bike camping, I was going out at least once a month, for those first few years, and I've slowed down a little bit recently. But from the time I first got started, I always had an interest in bringing people together around bike camping. In the top photo there with that big crew of folks, when I was working as a mechanic at the Bike Rack, a local shop here that folded unfortunately a few years ago. I had the chance I created a ride series called the Campfire Grind. We were bringing together upwards of 25 people at a time on these monthly bike camping adventures, on the gravel canal trail, just heading out. Even just the first 10, 15 miles on the trail, there's campsites that are accessible to the community. And I wanted to create a ride that was very beginner friendly and very kind of just a taster. It was beginner friendly, but also friendly to anyone who's experienced. And the idea of it is basically, it's like you can go bike camping and like still enjoy your weekend in the city if you want to. So you can get out. We would leave in the kind of late afternoon or evening on a Saturday, and get out to camp, have a fire, build community, make dinner together. We'd usually make tacos or have some kind of communal meal, and then wake up together, maybe go for a nature walk, see the sunrise, and find some beavers and wildflowers and whatever happened to be around us, and then could come back to town and just kind of have this strange like camping urban adventure and build community around it. And it was accessible to beginners, but also to folks who wanted a shakedown ride to be able to test out gear and kind of just like see how our setups were ready for whatever big adventure we had on the agenda for the next month or so. And it was so much fun. I've done a few of them since, and I want to do some more this year. But that's kind of how that's a lot of the bike camping trips that I have been on have been through that lens of kind of introducing beginners to it. But I've also been on some longer tours myself. I think the longest one I've done was a month along the US-Canada border that was more of a tour than a bikepacking trip, but involved a good amount of gravel. And then just, yeah, general bikepacking trips around the DC area, and then also in Arizona and New Mexico. I had the chance to do Danger Bird last fall, which is I did 150 miles of it, but it's either 150 or 250 miles. It was a big figure 8 through the city of Las Cruces down in southern New Mexico. It's a really amazing route on the Monumental Loop. I've also done, yeah, I guess the Sky Islands Loop out of Arizona, and a few shorter bikepacking trips throughout the Southwest. And then some rides around the DC area, Micho State Forest, and then I can't even remember. There's been several others around this area, but yeah, I love bikepacking and getting out on bike tours, and I've gotten to work on long distance tours across the US and then also across Europe, with a couple of different tour companies as a mechanic traveling along on those. And so I'm really passionate about spreading the joy of bikepacking and bike touring, and also as a mechanic and as that being my roots and my passion and where I kind of the perspective that I come at it from, I'm passionate about sharing some knowledge about yeah, just how we can make sure that our bikes are ready for our adventures, with some preparation ahead of time, and then also making sure that yeah, we pack the right things along with us, and we have some tools in our back pocket, metaphorically as well as physically, to make sure we're ready for anything that might come across our way on the trail. So I'm gonna flip through a couple more slides. So yeah, in these pictures, there's, yeah, me and my adventures, and then I'm gonna share one. This one is kind of just some of the stuff that I do with Upshift Workshops. So it's a fully pedal powered bike repair workshop here in DC. I do mostly house calls around the DC area, as well as pop-up shops and pop-up workshops. And I'm always happy to, yeah, I put together kind of custom workshops for people. I do a lot of bike packing focused lessons for people that are kind of trying out their first bike camping trips, and it's a lot of fun to get to share knowledge. So up in the upper left corner is my setup. Usually I have this big long tail cargo bike that is, my setup is very inspired by bike camping and the end of bike packing setups that I've used in the past and currently, and kind of have the most minimalist kit that I can to be able to basically offer a full service bike shop off the back of my bike, and just spend my days riding usually at least 15 to 20 miles around the city, servicing folks' bikes and offering lessons around the DC area. So several of our previous workshops have touched on this topic, but and I think actually, I wonder if we scroll, where is it? This one. This is our roadmap for what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to first touch on preparation, so how to prepare a bike for our next big adventure. Then we're going to talk about packing, so what tools and supplies we should bring along to be ready. And then finally, we'll talk about the most important topic that I think a lot of us want to know, is kind of just some field repairs. So I'm going to cover the top 5 most common mechanicals that I've personally experienced and kind of heard about friends experiencing on bikepacking trips and out in the world of on the road out there. And then we'll open the floor for some questions, and we'll have questions along the way. Like every as I conclude each section, we'll have space for Q&A, because I think that's really important to have some participation and be able to kind of communicate and share ideas and share questions as we go along. So it's not just me as a talking head on here. But I also, yeah, I'll definitely save some space at the end for any particular questions that y'all have about things that you've run into or concerns you might have. We'll try to cover as many as we can. We'll see how much time we have left. But yeah, I think in previous workshops, we talked a lot about what kind of bikes to choose, and just how to set up our bikes so that we're ready for an adventure. Both of these 2 bikes are bikes that I have used on bikepacking trips at various stages in my journey as a bikepacker. The one on the left is my little Specialized rock hopper from 1991 that I got for $15. The frame set I did, at least, at a swap meet with a stuck seat post. I unstuck the seat post. I bought a set of wheels. I found some random used bike parts at the co-op I was working at the time, including like a walled basket that was donated, some like miscellaneous like Diore mountain bike parts, and threw it together. And that was my bike packing bike with that exact setup, just throwing all my camping gear in the basket in the front, for my first probably 2 or 3 years of bike camping in the area. And the one on the right is a bike that I borrowed from my friend Michael, and for the Danger Bird. It's an awesome little Salsa Fargo, with tubeless tires set up. Here in DC, I don't need to use tubeless tires. Most of our terrain doesn't require them, for the routes that I'm using. And so when I'm in the process of actually shopping for my first like real like big kid bike packing bike. I still use that rock hopper on the left with a slightly different setup that you'll see behind me here actually. It's a little bit more dialed than it was at that time. And I'll show you that a little bit clearer in a moment. But yeah, there's lots of different setups you can use for our bikes. The main thing, and why I'm showing these images in general, is that it's not about the specific gear that we're using, necessarily. It's about making sure that gear is dialed. So making sure that like whatever the terrain is that we're going to be expecting to experience on the trail, that bike that we're riding is able to accommodate that terrain. So like I know that the terrain around here, we don't have the thorns, we don't have the spines that we have in the Southwest that require tubeless tire setups. The most of the flats you might get around here, like it's going to be from maybe a big rock or something that will still slash your tubeless setup. And so there's certain things you don't necessarily need to use the highest tech gear necessarily for a trip. We just have to use the gear that will get us through that trip. I'm a big minimalist when it comes to adventures. I don't think that we need to have the shiniest, fanciest gear necessarily. You just have to make sure that gear is fully dialed. And I think that that's really important when we're trying to avoid gatekeeping, this amazing activity we like to do, because we don't necessarily have to have that shiniest thing. We don't need to spend thousands of dollars to have an amazing experience, but we do want to make sure that whatever gear we're using is fully dialed in. And that's where preparation comes into play. And so I have a little slide here showing a couple things you want to make sure that we check on our bike. And I'm going to pull up my notes really fast. I've been speaking off the cuff a little bit, so I'm going to try and find my actual notes about what I want to talk about. So I want to first touch on kind of the power of like doing a tune-up. And as a mechanic, this is kind of a thing that, yeah, you walk into your normal bike shop, they're like, oh, do you want to tune up on your bike? And a lot of people don't know what a tune-up means. I'm going to try to cover these topics fairly quickly, and then we'll get into things that are maybe more interesting. But a tune-up generally is going to mean a full inspection and diagnosis of your bike. It's going to involve deep cleaning of your components and your frame. It's going to involve adjusting your brakes, your shifting, and your bearing systems, and then kind of a general reset of the bike. So making sure things are kind of back to their factory settings. It's also going to be checking for any wear of our components. So in these images, I have a couple examples of parts that are experiencing some wear and damage that I have taken. I took all these photos from customer bikes that I've gone through as part of my work over the last couple of years. And so we have kind of looking at different parts on our bike that might have issues. We have brake pads that can either wear down flat, or in this case, they can be glazed or contaminated. Those are disc brake pads, but the same kind of thing applies to rim brake pads. And just making sure that we check our brake pads to make sure they're not worn out. Ring brake pads will be more like this of a shape. And yeah, when those little grooves have worn down flat, then it's time to replace them if we can't see those grooves anymore. Tires, definitely we want to inspect and make sure they're in good shape. So we have an example there of one that has a hole in the sidewall. We want to check for any cracks or damage to the sidewalls that can happen with age. So tires can wear down just through age of sitting on low tire pressure, just wearing out and getting dried out and dry rotted. You'll notice cracks in the sidewalls. Also the tread, just through use, the tread is going to wear down flat. So if it ever looks flat on the surface and the tread is not visible anymore, we want to replace those tires as well. If I see any larger cuts and cracks in the tire, we want to replace them then. Also looking at if you have a tubeless setup, we happen to just making sure that tubeless sealant is changed out on a regular basis. That photo below, is going to be an example of tubeless sealant that's been allowed to dry out. It's old and it's not able to do its job preventing flats anymore. When we have a tubeless tire setup, which is common on a lot of bikepacking bikes, and we get a lot of questions about that. Tubeless setups work with a liquid sealant that floats around on the inside of a hollow tire. And when we get a puncture on those tires, that sealant through some kind of centripetal force of that tire spinning kind of goes out and is able to kind of soak into that spot where the hole has happened. When it interacts with air, it hardens. And if there's a big layer of dried out sealant on the inside, it's not able to do its job solving our punctures. And so we'll end up getting flats. And so changing out our sealant is recommended every 3 to 6, like kind of adding additional sealant every 3 to 6 months and changing it out fully every 6 to 12 months is going to prevent that kind of buildup that we have in that image there. Also making sure that we stay on top of our chain wear and our chain care. So kind of, this is all preventative stuff that we want to make sure we do before we go out on the trail, before we go on any kind of big tour, because if we're not taking care of any of these things on this list here, if any of them happen to be worn out, these are things that can cause mechanicals on the road that are totally preventable if we were to pay attention to it ahead of time. So chain wear, that's a photo of a chain checker. I have one right here. I'll grab for us. Having one of these in our arsenal, or making use of our local bike shops that have one. Probably any bike shop near you is always happy to check your chain wear for free, most likely. And it is always checked during a tune-up as well. This tool slots down into our chain and is able to measure when a chain is worn out. Chains wear because we have metal plates and pins and rollers that live inside of our chain, and all those metals are metals of similar hardness. And as you're riding hundreds of miles and your chain is bending a lot, those rivet points where all of the rubbing is happening between our metal plates and pins and rollers starts to wear out because they're metals of similar hardness with lots of friction rubbing on each other. And so our chain will actually get longer over the course of it. And so if we ever have issues of our chain breaking or a chain skipping around, sometimes that can be because our chain has actually gotten a little bit looser at each of those rivets, and the chain has gotten longer and doesn't line up well with our gears anymore. And that can increase the risk of our chain breaking and also cause other issues. And so keeping on top of our chain wear is really important. Talking about like the length of time that these parts are going to last, brake pads before they wear down flat might be, on my cargo bike that I showed you in the last image, it can be as little as 1,000 miles. I think that if I wait 1,000 miles on that big heavy cargo bike that's carrying like 150 pounds of gear every day, it's too late. I usually have to catch it a little before 1,000 miles on a normal touring bike or a normal bikepacking bike. They might be seeing something more like it can be as many as like maybe as many as 2,000 to 3,000. It kind of depends on the kind of riding you're doing and how much descending and what kind of weather we're experiencing. Like wet weather makes them wear out a lot faster. As far as tire length or tire durability, it depends on the softness of the rubber of our tires and what kind of terrain we're riding them on. If we have really knobby mountain tires and we're riding them on kind of like more like pavement and things that are harder terrain as opposed to dirt, they're going to wear out faster, but tires can last as long as, again, kind of 2,000 to 3,000 miles depending on the terrain we're riding on. Kind of just more visual for any of these parts is all about kind of inspecting them visually and making sure that they're not worn out yourself. Chains will last us, chains are a little bit more dependent on the care that we're giving them and our riding style as well. And so chains can last as little as like 1,500 miles or even less if we're really not maintaining it at all. Or it can last as much as 4,000 plus miles if we're doing a really good job taking care of it. Chain care is going to involve, I'll give you a demonstration in a bit, but chain care is going to look like, keeping your chain relatively clean and just making sure it stays lubricated using a chain oil every few hundred miles and not overdoing it. We'll talk more on that a little bit later. We talk about the actual maintenance side of stuff. But yeah, that's our chain care and how chains can wear out. We also have an image here of gears on our bike. Those are our front chain rings. And just making sure that we kind of inspect those as well. Like the front chain ring should never be pointy, like that inner chain ring that's kind of sharp and kind of has wider gaps between it. That's what happens when we have a worn out chain wearing down on our chain ring. The one in the back is a new one, so you can kind of see the difference in those two, so we can kind of visually know how to inspect our chain rings. And that last image that hopefully we can see, but I think it might be kind of, I wonder if it's blocked by our faces, but there should be. Can we see it?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so we have we have an image of some cable wear. Cables can wear out in a couple of different ways. So this is an image of housing that has failed. But it can basically a lot of parts on our bikes, if we don't have electronic shifting, and we don't have hydraulic brakes, so we're operate by cables and pulleys. And so making sure that our cables, anything that uses cables on our bike, the levers should always be easy to operate. If it ever feels like there's a lot of resistance in there, it can lead to, I mean, housing failure happens just through the age of the housing, but also like, yeah, we can have cables that have rusted inside the housing, and it's not going to get better on its own. Replacing those parts or making sure they stay lubricated and or both is going to help make sure that those parts are working well. And we can talk more about that later too. Cables, yeah, cables are important. A big part about just making sure our bike is comfortable to ride kind of ties into making sure that our parts are moving smoothly. And so yeah, the health of our cables is really important for that. A lot of cables that come stock on our bikes are going to be they might be kind of a coarser metal. They use a galvanized steel that is easy to corrode, and that adds a lot of friction to our systems. A really easy kind of upgrade to make our bikes more comfortable to ride is going to be switching to a stainless steel slick cable. And those ones are, it makes our riding quality so much better. Our brakes are easier to pull if we use mechanical brakes. Our shifting moves smoother. They don't corrode over time if we're riding through kind of wet conditions. So that's a nice kind of easy upgrade for our bike. And that's kind of some common things to look at. I'm gonna let's see. 1 second. Oops, here we go. I guess I want to do a quick Q&A if we have any questions about preventative maintenance before we get going. I wanted to also talk about quickly before I go to the Q&A. Yeah, I guess that's probably, yeah, if we could do a Q&A, that would be awesome. If anyone has any questions.
Awesome. Okay, questions are coming in.
Awesome.
I went on a 4-day bikepacking trip with a new nice bike. My handlebar bags ate through my cables. How to
Yeah.
prevent? Question mark.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so things we can look at as well before we go on our trip is going to be thinking about that kind of wear and rubbing. A lot of times the bags on our bikes, like I use where's my jammer bag? I have a really awesome bag I love this thing from Roadrunner, the jammer that mounts right to my handlebars. And the problem with that often is that, yeah, those if we squish it up against our cables, it can start to make them rub. And so kind of thinking about and looking at our bike ahead of time and kind of anticipating what might be wearing and rubbing. So if I have this bike up here on my handlebars, thinking about, are they pinching my cables? And if it is, thinking about spacing. You can buy foam spacers that go with our bags and with our harnesses that kind of are designed, or you can use, there's a few companies out there like Swood and like, I forget who else is like the Bar Jam harness from, or the Bar Jam harness mount cradle thing from, I forget who's making that now. There's a few different companies that are making these kind of like out in front, clamped on spacers that are either made of metal or foam that you can use to kind of space your bags out, and that helps prevent that rub and wearing through our cables and housing. That can prevent that image there on the right from happening to you. And so kind of inspecting our bike ahead of time as part of that inspection. So we either have our bike shop do a tune-up of our bike is really important, and kind of making sure that we're all 100%, we have a good solid reset of our bike, and we're not going to intentionally be going out on a tour with a bike that's in poor mechanical condition. But there's also like, once we have our bags on there, like thinking about logically, like what parts are rubbing, what parts might be, maybe even like adding some like helicopter tape or stuff to our frame and making sure we're not going to damage our paint. Kind of thinking about our cable routing and thinking about the spacing of our bags. Sometimes on bikepacking bikes, we might space, we might end up kind of making sure we talk to our bike shop, or if we're doing it ourselves, have longer cables and longer housing on the front of our bike than we might otherwise. And that gives us some space to be able to kind of squish them down a little bit easier so that they don't get pinched and impact our brakes and shifting when we install bags on the front too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And it looks like some folks are chiming in on the chat with different brands for those spacers to get the
Thank you so much.
harness farther from the cables.
Thank you.
Next question, is there a guide regarding how to change out the sealant? And I'm not sure if they're referring to how often or just the actual
Like how to
technique.
do it. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
not going to have time to do that tonight. It's more on the prevention side, but there's plenty of great resources online for that. Generally, there's two different methods for installing fresh sealant. So one of them is you can remove the valve core at your valve and use a syringe or a funnel to dump some new sealant, and usually a syringe to dump some new sealant in there. Otherwise, you can pop the bead off one part of your tire and dump some in with a measuring cup. And those are kind of the two main methods. But yeah, ideally doing it, yeah, topping it off every 3 to 6 months, and replacing it fully every 6 to 12 months, usually more often if the bike has been sitting or if it's hotter temperatures, because that sealant will dry out faster. Um,
And it looks
yeah,
like someone linked a YouTube video in there of
I
some.
love this. I love this
Great.
participation. We're supporting each other. I love it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Is there anything else that we see coming in at this point?
I think that's all for now. So I think we can go into the next section and we'll do another Q&A after that.
Cool, thank you. Fantastic. Yeah, yeah, taking care of our bike ahead of time will help prevent like the majority of mechanicals we're gonna experience in the field. There are things that happen emergency wise out there on the trail, but making sure that things are in good shape ahead of time is so important. A lot of the things that I have seen from friends' bikes and like fellow riding buddies' bikes while I'm out on the trail have been things where it's like, hey, we probably could have taken care of this ahead of time. And so having if you don't have a lot of shop experience and mechanical experience yourself, like either leaning on your friends or leaning on your local bike shop, that's why we're here. We're always happy and actually like super stoked to help you get set up for your trip. If you bring it to your local bike shop and you're like, hey, I'm gonna do this epic trip like soon, they're gonna be so excited and want to help you out and answer your questions if you have any and help you get set up and find the right gear. Just make sure your bike's ready to go. I want to make sure before I go out on a tour, kind of like general bare bones, that even if it's a short overnighter, just to make sure I'm good to go, I'll make sure my chain, I want to make sure my brake pads, my chain, and my tires are all less than halfway worn. I want to make sure my cables have been inspected for fraying and corrosion. I want to make sure that my tubeless sealant is less than 3 months old. If that's relevant, if I have tubeless, I want to make sure my hydraulic brakes have no problems and that they maybe have been bled within the last year at minimum, or at least they have no problems that I'm experiencing. All my bearings are tight and also spinning smoothly. And I want to make sure that all my bolts are torqued to spec. My chain is clean and oiled. That's like the bare bones for getting out on a tour. And so if your bike is in a condition that's not quite at that point, getting it checked out before we head out is a really good idea, and just make sure we're good to go. We don't have to have anything happening while we're out on the trail. And I guess yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. The bare bones of what I want to make sure that I know how to do myself on my bike before I go out on the trail is going to be, I want to know how to change a flat tire. I want to know how to repair a chain. I want to know how to do adjustments on my brakes. I want to know how to adjust my spokes, how to use my multi-tool correctly, and then what it should feel like when my bike is working correctly. So I've only ever had junky bikes and I've never experienced what a correctly working bike feels like. I want to make sure that I know what that feels like bare bones before I head on a tour, so that I don't, if your brakes are loose, they're not going to get better while we're out there. And so kind of just making sure we know what that feels like is really important. And I also want to make sure that my bike is, yeah, fully fit and dialed in. There's all kinds of things we can adjust ourselves out on the trail to kind of fiddle with our bike, but we should make sure that the bike is comfortable before we head out on the tour. I'm going to talk about kind of some things that we might want to pack on our tour to make sure that we're going to be prepared to take care of some stuff. And then we'll talk about how to make those repairs and adjustments that I talked about. So this is an example. We have two examples of toolkits that I have brought on bike rides. For a short around town ride, that one on the right should take care of my needs. I have at minimum something to inflate my tires. I have some tire levers to fix my flats. I have a couple zip ties, maybe a patch kit, a multi-tool, a little quick link for my chain, and a roll of Gorilla Tape wrapped on itself. And that's kind of like my minimum that I usually will bring if I'm going on any kind of tour that I don't have access to, like a bus or a friend coming to rescue me, even just a little day ride. That's the minimum that I want to bring along to make sure I can take care of things that I might run into. Anything that's longer than that, so any kind of overnighter, that one on the left is going to be our friend. And that's the minimum for an overnight trip. What I add to that one that I don't see on the right is going to be I add a spare let me look at my whole list of what I have on here. But yeah, I added on this a spare nut and bolt for or a couple of them, even if I have a rack on my bike, just in case things rattle loose on the trail. A common thing that can happen on the trail is making sure they just yeah, bolts can rattle loose, and so checking those at camp every night is important. I also will bring yeah, some a mini bottle of chain lube, something really small, like these little 1 milliliter ones are pretty amazing. You can refill them at some bike shops or from your big bottle at home. And they're really handy to have along. I'll bring a cut up old t-shirt as a rag, something like this, and just kind of tuck it in my pocket. And I can always, if it gets dirty, I can toss it and replenish it. That's the nice thing about these, is they're just total scrap fabric. They're junk. Like, you can just cut up an old t-shirt or go to a thrift store and find some scrap fabric. Ask a hotel for their old towels, whatever it is that you have along the way, and be able to replenish your rag for the chain lube, or for cleaning our bike. I want to, even if I have a tubeless setup, always bring a tube and a patch kit. At least one tube. I sometimes will bring two, just in case I really, really don't want to get stranded out there. So I make sure that I'm fully set up. In this setup, I don't have a tubeless dart kit, or kind of like a plug kit, but will bring that as well with me as I go. I also have a chain breaker in there for repairing my chain if it for some reason breaks in the field. Sometimes I'll even bring two options of multi-tools. I might have that little kind of simple park tool one, and I might have a little ratcheting one. If I have a carbon bike with any carbon components, I'm also going to bring this little ratcheting guy. I might bring a torque wrench version of this as well, instead of this, to make sure that I'm not going to over torque any of my components. They make like mini torque wrenches that are pretty handy. If you aren't familiar with torque on carbon components, anything that's carbon on a bike, it's really important to make sure that we don't over tighten those parts or under tighten those parts, because they can get damaged. And so when we talk about torque, that means how tight I'm making a part on my bike. I like to joke that my wrist is calibrated after being a mechanic for this many years, but on carbon parts, I still want to make sure that I use a torque wrench. They come in lots of different shapes and sizes, but the idea is that it will click and pop when the part is tight enough. And if I use that, if I use an example, I can use it on my multi-tool and tighten it down. It's not going to do it because basically it'll fit into there, and it'll make a popping sound when the part is tight enough. And every part on our bike has a different torque specification. So just making sure that we don't over tighten parts on our bike is really important. But that's kind of the gist of our kit there. I also have a spare shift cable, and if I'm going on a really long tour and I have mechanical brakes, I'm also going to bring a spare brake cable just in case. If I'm going on a really long tour, I want to start thinking about part wear. So if I'm going for longer than a few thousand miles, or even longer than 1,000 miles, I'm also bringing along. I'm making sure I have fresh brake pads to start with. I'm also bringing along a spare set of brake pads. I'm also bringing along maybe at least one spare set of brake pads, probably two, depending on the length of my tour. Because they're small, you can tuck them in your pocket. They're like this big. Just tuck them in the side pocket of something and have them for when you need them. If I am going to be somewhere remote and traveling a long time and have kind of an unusual tire size, like most modern bikepacking bikes do, like 29ers and 27 and a half, if I'm going somewhere remote or somewhere like somewhere internationally that might not have easy access to bike shops, I want to make sure that I am either shipping ahead or bringing with me also spare tires, and several spare tubes if I need them, just to make sure that I'm ready to go. And it's a pain to pack those bigger things, but it's better than getting stranded somewhere. And there are more minimalist versions of these toolkits you can get. I think the Toe Peak Alien, or like there's a few other kind of really comprehensive multi-tools that are out there that will have that spoke wrench and have that chain breaker built into your little multi-tool, all as like one little package. And those are pretty awesome. For myself, I have found, because I'm a mechanic and I'm picky about my tools, I like to have the tool be like as easy to use as possible. And so I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of space and weight to like have a tool that's like a little bit less annoying to use. And like kind of the same thing, if we have a really big pocket knife, all the extra tools on that pocket knife become a little bit less easy to use, I guess. It's not to say that they're difficult and it's not like it's not possible to use it, but it just makes it a little bit more challenging. And for myself, I like to have maybe, yeah, it's like have my tools be a little bit more separate, just so that I can have an easier time using them. Just because I end up being the mechanic for a lot of my friends on tours that I go on. And so I want to have my tools be a little bit easier to use. For most people, you're not going to be using your tools very often. Get something more compact and more lightweight. And all in one is totally fine. You hopefully won't have to use it too often. But that's what my usual tool set will look like. And then what else do we have? Ooh. Yeah, so when it's packed up, it'll look something kind of like this. So everything kind of packs into a little pouch. I have mine right here. I use I think it's made by Green Guru. It's like this little recycled inner tube pouch. Sometimes I have a slightly bigger bag that I'll use. One of these guys, my friend June here in DC made these for me for some merch a couple years ago. It was really fun. It kind of just like holds all the things you need and then folds down really nice and small and can fold that into your bag. But I think the other thing that I didn't mention that I also will bring along is I often have a little brush of some kind, either an old toothbrush that I've cut the handle off of, or this is just like a brush from the hardware store. That's if I'm riding through really muddy conditions. This thing is amazing for getting the mud off my tires and off my drivetrain. I can really scrub and get into nooks and crannies and get stuff out that if I need to in a pinch, I can use a stick. And I've done that many a time on the trail, but this is a handy thing to have. It's kind of a luxury item if you have space for it. I'll also often bring a little piece of sandpaper if I have disc brakes, just a scrap piece folded up in my bag. So if my disc brakes get contaminated a little bit and they're squealing, I can try to, if I know how to take my disc brakes out, I can sand them off a little bit and try and make the squeal go away. And sometimes it can be really helpful. Or if I end up breaking a part on my bike and there's some jagged metal, the same thing, those can kind of sand it down and file it and make it not be sharp anymore. And more recently, I've also been carrying a spare pair of pliers, or as an alternative, I have a pocket knife that has kind of like a Leatherman style one that has pliers built into it. And those are really useful as well. If you have any nuts and bolts or things that are stuck places, having some kind of pliers, ideally probably in a pocket knife style, is just really handy to be able to get in places and take care of stuff that you need to. And I think that's most of the stuff they're bringing along. I also, one of the images we used on social media to share about this was a tire that had been sewn and to repair a sidewall damage. And I will also bring a little sewing kit with some thread and a needle in my bag as well, just in case. You hope you really, really don't have to use it, but I always will have a little sewing kit in here too, whether for clothes or tent or whatever it is. I've never had to use it yet, but it's useful to have when you need it. And I'm trying to think if I have anything else in here. I have my little pouch here that I always bring on tours. But I think that's most of the stuff. The duct tape that's in, or the Gorilla tape that was rolled on itself in that image that you can still kind of see in that image on the right is, and the zip ties. There might be some questions about why I have these like random objects in there. And I've probably used those more than the tools in my kit, just for miscellaneous things breaking, or like, you can use the Gorilla tape I've used so many ways. Like probably, yeah, I guess the main way that I use it typically is gonna be booting a tire. So if my tire, like a non-tubeless tire, like I tend to use here in the Mid-Atlantic area, if you get one of those rock sidewall tears that happen sometimes around here, and you want to prevent, if you get kind of the general rule with a tire is that if you have a tube inside of it, is if the cut in the tire is more than 3 millimeters long, or it breaks more than 3 of the threads on the inside of the casing of the tire, you need to put a boot on it to prevent your tube from popping out through the tire. And that Gorilla tape is really amazing to help be a little boot to protect that tube from popping out and kind of hold the tire together. Folks have also used, yeah, I think the common kind of trope of like bike tours using a dollar bill or like a candy wrapper to kind of also create that buffer is common. The Gorilla tape just stays in place. It's really handy, and it's woven so it doesn't stretch out, which is really great. I just put that on the inside of the tire, not on the tread side, but on the inside, and then install my tube, and it will hold. I've never had an issue with it bursting. But ideally, when you have a cut that big, you do want to replace that tire as soon as possible, if you can get to town and get to a bike shop. I've also used it to repair I had a mouse eat through my pannier once, or a bird. I don't know what kind of animal it was. I returned to camp one day after a hike, and my pannier had a hole this big in the side of it that had been eaten away. And they tried to get at my food, and I think I got back just in time, but the pannier had a giant gaping hole in the side. Gorilla tape, unroll it, cover it right up, and it wasn't waterproof, but at least my stuff wasn't falling out as I was riding down the street. I riding down the trail. And so that, yeah, gorilla tape is wonderful. Zip ties can be used for many things as well. If a bolt breaks, or if a spoke breaks, you can use that zip tie to tie the spoke to its buddy so it's not rattling around scratching your frame. Can be used to, anything that's rattling on your bike, just cinch it on down with the zip ties and it doesn't rattle anymore. They do a really good job. And that's kind of usually what's in my toolkit when I'm on the trail. Everyone has a slightly different one. And I think that I tend to be a little more maximalist than some because I am typically the trip mechanic. Sometimes I will bring more than that. I'll bring several sizes of quick links for my friends. I might bring a couple sizes of tubes, even if I'm trying to spoil folks, just to make sure that I'm taking care of folks around me. But the patch kit is there just in case. And I actually have switched. The perk tool ones are fine. I tend to also prefer using these ones from Rima, the green kind of turquoise ones. I found that the patches tend to be a little more reliable. That's kind of just like my experience using these. That's kind of the gist of that. So kind of just thinking about the terrain we're going to be riding on and how we're setting up our bike ahead of time is really important. So kind of, and this is from the Monumental Loop last fall when I was riding it. So kind of looking at all these cacti and the rocks and the sand and making sure that I set up my bike in such a way that it's going to be ready for that kind of terrain. So there's lots of different terrains we can ride through on our bikes and on our tours that we're going on. It can be anything from sharp cacti, it could be loose sand and rocks, it can be water, it can be grass, it can be all kinds of things. And so we've already had a workshop in the series about setting up our bike correctly. But as a mechanic, I want to touch on that again and just making sure that we have the width of tires that we need, the kind of tread on our tires that we need for the terrain we're riding on. Bikepacking routes is amazing, as well as bikepacking.com and any of the other resources that provide routes for the community. They often will, I think almost always, but Biking Routes especially is great about doing it. They always recommend a tire width. They'll say at least 2 inches wide or at least 2.25 inches wide of tires are recommended for this route. I'm just making sure that, it'll tell you like how much of the terrain is paved or unpaved, just making sure we set our bikes up correctly for the terrain that's needed tire wise, but also mechanical wise, like knowing that if it's going to be a really dusty route, I might need to keep my chain oiled and cleaned more often. I want to make sure I bring enough chain oil and a rag that I'll be okay to keep my chain lubricated so it doesn't get dry and just be squeaking and creaking the whole way down the trail. If it's a really wet location I'm going to, same kind of thing applies. I definitely want to make sure that in that case I'm bringing my little trusty brush along to kind of scrub out the mud from crevices on my bike and keep things moving correctly and make sure that things aren't going to get gummed up and really gross and muddy. And I'm going to keep talking about chain care, and I might demonstrate that in a second. What else do I have on my list? Let's see. That's what I'm going to talk about next. So I guess before we go to this section, do we have any questions about what I've been talking about so far about, I guess I've been rambling a little bit, but like tools to bring along on the route.
There were a couple questions that are related to what you were just chatting about. The first is, what are thoughts on using Loctite for some parts, such as racks?
We love Loctite. Loctite's great, especially for rack bolts, for anything we don't want rattling loose on our bike. I think there should be some kind of liquid on every part of our bike that we put on it, or some kind of goo of some form. Grease is great for anything you want to be able to remove again easily, which on a bikepacking bike is not very many things. And so Loctite is great for it just keeps the moisture out and keeps stuff from rattling loose. So if we have a rack on our bike, if we have anything cages, what else do we put on here? There's all kinds of stuff, but we want to make sure that we have a little Loctite on all those bolts. Loctite it can come in a stick form or it can come in a liquid. bike shops will put it on if you ask them to, or you can get some yourself at the local hardware store. I would use the blue kind. Any of the other colors are probably going to be a little bit too strong. Want to make sure you want to be able to remove those parts again when you need to. But the blue kind of Loctite is fully adequate. Just put a little line on there, or you can, yeah, just put a little line on the bolt before you install it. And it basically holds that bolt in place so that it basically like kind of resists it unscrewing a little bit. You might still have to tighten it a couple times on the trail, but it definitely helps.
On a similar liquid note, do you recommend oil-based or water-based chain lubes?
I have never heard of a water-based chain lube, and I'm curious about that. There are some bio kind of eco-friendly chain lubes. Maybe I wonder if you're talking about like a wet versus a dry chain lube, perhaps. And if that's the case, um, I'm uh, I'm in an interesting camp where I tend to prefer my drivetrain to ride really cleanly. And there's different camps on this, and like there's different ways to make your drivetrain run clean. They're using more of a wax-based lube, or using a drier chain lube. Ones that are designed for kind of drier conditions are both ways to kind of make sure that our chain runs a little bit cleaner. The thing about those oils and the only downside of them is things run really clean, but you do have to apply it more often. So these oils are ones that might last us only 1 to 200 miles before they start to wear off, and we have to reapply it on our chain. The wax ones will last a little bit longer, but if I'm using a dry lube like these mini bottles of T9 that I tend to like because they run really clean and they're easy to source and replenish, they might only last us a few hundred miles, and we have to basically restock up our chain. For any There's also wetter, like all condition chain lubes as well. They run a little bit dirtier. Our chain tends to be a little bit kind of sticky and oily sometimes, but we don't have to reapply our chain lube quite as often. So we're trying to get like a longer duration between having to reapply it. We can use those oils and kind of just wipe it off as it gets dirty. That's another way to kind of take care of our chain. That's kind of my thoughts on it. For myself, I tend to use a little bit lighter ones, just because I don't like it to be quite as gummed up, and I don't like cleaning my chain as often. Yeah, the reason we oil our chains, and it's really important to think about it this way, is like it's about reducing that friction between those metal plates and the pins and the rollers we talked about. And the more friction there is, the faster our chain wears out. If we're able to ever hear our chain, whether it's grinding because of sand, or whether it's squeaking because it's dry, or whether it's making weirder, louder noises because it's full of dirt and grime, that all is friction that's wearing out the links. It's not the end of the world if that happens. Like, it's fine to ride a dirty chain. It's probably not going to break on you, but your chain's going to last not as long. And so we want to make sure we have like the longest length of the age of our components, and get the most life out of them, and get our money's worth and help the environment. Then oiling our chain is going to be a way to help make sure that we don't waste materials, and we can have our chain last as long as possible. And it also reduces the risk of it breaking if it's not running dry all the time. And so just making sure we stay on top of that chain oiling is important.
Awesome. And then another question is, do you have any tricks for breaking the bead on a tubeless tire if your just grip strength can't pop it?
Yeah, that may be more of a question for the repair side of things we're about to jump into. And yeah, I'm happy to chat about that then. There are It's hard to That's going to be a hard one to demonstrate without being in person, because I don't have a tubeless tire that I'm going to be using. But I'll go over flat fixing in the last section, I'm happy to kind of demonstrate it then for sure. It's a great question.
Well, I
Yeah.
think that's all that are open right now.
Amazing. You love it. So we're gonna jump into our next topic, which is some of the more common repairs you might have and run into on the trail. So let's see if I can, yeah, here we go. Yeah, so our picture here is my friend Danielle, who had a little bit of puncture on her tubeless tires, and we have some sealant leaking out here. But I guess, yeah, our most common 5 mechanicals you might run into that I have experienced so far on the trail: flat tire, the ubiquitous flat tire. You have broken chains, broken spokes, bent derailleur hangers, and brake noise. I want to talk about, I guess, yeah, what do I want to talk about? I want to talk about a couple of things that are important to know about yeah, flat fixing, I guess. So I think we talked briefly about like what the like, kind of ways to use Gorilla Tape and stuff like that. I might demonstrate a quick flat change and kind of how I do that quickly. For some of you, it might be kind of redundant. I hope that maybe some folks might learn something and we can have some fun. And I also want to introduce you to my trusty assistant here, this lovely rock hopper here I have in the back. It's from 1991. I built it myself. I love it so much. And it's yeah, it's running a pretty fun modern wide range drivetrain on it. I threw a bunch of XT parts, including some fun XT Shimano XT brakes and some cool bling on it as well. And it's been my trusty bike for many years of bike packing adventures. And I'm gonna, I guess, pull off one of our wheels and we can kind of demonstrate some flat fixing if I can, kind of oddly in this Zoom Zoom video here. Give me 1 second to get that set up. But flat fixing is a really important skill set to have. Many of us hopefully don't get to practice it very often. It's something that is a skill we don't want to get good at if we're not a mechanic. I do maybe 3 to 5 of these a week minimum usually, but for most of us, we want to do them less than once a year because that means we're not running into mechanicals on the road. So hopefully we won't get good at this, but it's good to have a couple tips and tricks in our back pocket so we can take care of ourselves or take care of our riding buddies when we're out on adventure. So I'm gonna pull off which of our wheels? Probably our back wheel will be a good example. Give me just
Leah,
1 second. What's
Leah,
that?
I think if you can stop screen share, then we'll all be able to see you
Yeah,
bigger than your whole.
yeah, I can do that. I'm
Okay.
gonna make sure I don't have any other images that are important to share. Yeah, I think that's good. Um, Let me see if I can get rid of the screen share. Are we?
There should be like a red button next to a green.
I'm so sorry. um, oh, there it is.
I can
Gotcha.
stop. Oh, there
Found
you
it.
go.
Amazing. Here we go. Is that better for everyone?
Great.
I am not a pro at Zoom. We are learning in this moment. So yeah,
Well,
I'm
it's
gonna
awesome.
pull the back wheel off. And I hope the audio is, am I being loud enough for those of you that are listening when I'm all the way back here?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, cool. Amazing. My high school theater projecting experience is still working. We love it. So I'm gonna pull our back wheel out. Things to know about removing a back wheel. There were a couple of questions in the original. I noticed in the questions when y'all were registering, there were a couple of questions about removing a back wheel. A couple of tips and tricks to know about that. I don't have a great second camera to be able to show you guys that what that might look like, but essentially tips and tricks for this particular derailleur setup is my derailleur. I'm going to bring us a little bit closer maybe so we can see. Maybe a tiny bit better, but my derailleur on the back here, it's a kind of, it's a Shimano rear derailleur. It's kind of nicer. It has a little clutch tab. I want to make sure that clutch tab has an on position or has an off position. When I go to release my wheel, I want to make sure my clutch is always in the off position. I'm gonna put my wheel back where it was. And obviously when I'm on the trail, I most likely am not going to be privileged enough to have a handy repair stand like this. So what I'm showing you is always going to be upside down. But the first thing I want to do is flip off my clutch to the off position. And what that does is gives my derailleur in the back a little bit of movement. So I can angle it up and down. When the clutch is on, that clutch is designed to keep my chain stiff so it doesn't rattle around as I'm riding. And I flip that clutch off so that my derailleur can move. I'll also go pedal forward and I'm going to shift my shifter so that my chain falls into my smallest gear in the back. And kind of pedal forward and click and shift. When it's in the smallest gear, that makes it easier to get my wheel off and also makes it easier to line it back up again when I go to put it back on. And so I'm just going to remove our back wheel really quick. The main trick for getting our back wheel off, if we have a dropout system, like we don't have through, like this older bike does not have through axles that go through the side. I want to make, but also, even if I do have a through axle, the main trick is getting my derailleur far enough back that, let me bring us a little bit closer even. Can I do that? Yeah. I have you guys set up on my kitchen counter right now, so it's a little bit maybe not ideal, but bring us a little bit closer in. I wonder if I can do it even. That's probably good there. Yeah, I want to make sure I have a clear space for my wheel to come straight down as it comes out. So I pull back my derailleur so that I have space to go out. I pull it back and I can just, I have to open my brakes on this bike first and I wiggle my wheel straight down and out we come. And so with my wheel off, there's lots of different kinds of flats we can get on the trail. Some of them are environmental, so we might run over something sharp. We might, yeah, it could be a sharp rock, it could be a thorn, it could be, I've run over like roofing nails and broken CDs and whatever is out there, depending on the conditions that we're in. All kinds of fun stuff. Let me find how my stuff's all tangled up, so I don't know where my tools are. There they are. I'm gonna simulate a flat and give myself, kind of let my air out of my tire. 1 sec for loud noises to happen. But yeah, we can get the telltale noise of a flat happening. And other kinds of flats we can get are flats that come from the inside. So if we have tubeless, our tubeless tape could have peeled up, or our rim tape, our normal rim tape could have peeled up. We can get all kind. Yeah, there could be if we hit a bad pothole sometimes, or if we have too low of tire pressure, sometimes our tube on the inside, if we have a tube system, or if we're tubeless, the tube system can get pinched, or the tubeless system can like burp out the side a little bit and that lets all our air out. But if any of these things happen, if we've lost enough air that it's not, yeah, if you have a flat on our tire that's not a simple burp on a tubeless system, we have to get our tire off. And so in order to do that, my favorite tools are Pedro's tire levers. I'm not paid by Pedro's. I just love how flat they are. I think Muck Off makes a similar one. These like wide, flat plastic levers are so much superior to anything that's like on the smaller side. These are more packable and smaller. They don't work as well. These are better. I tend to like these wide ones as well as much as I can. And it will pretty much only pack them because the extra space is worth how easy they are to use. And I basically want to, they have a scoop side on one side and a hook side on the other side. And the scoop side is designed to scoop and the hook side is designed to hook. And most of our tires fit on really tightly. And so what I'm going to be doing is basically I pull back the edge of my tire if I can. And we had a question earlier that I want to address now about how to pop the bead off a really tight tubeless tire. And that's a really a great question because sometimes they are quite tight. This one was quite loose. I let the air out, the tire pops right off the edge. On tubeless setups, or rims that are tubeless ready, or tires that are tubeless ready. When I talk about tubeless, for any of us who might not know what tubeless means, a tube system has an inner tube living inside of our tire and holding all the air like a big balloon. A tubeless system is basically a tire with no inner tube on the inside, and it fits so tightly on the rim that it doesn't need a tube to hold the air. The tire itself holds the air inside of it, and it basically just like is all as airtight as possible. And you injected sealant on the inside of that. That's kind of almost looks like Elmer's glue. It's kind of like a white liquid that lives inside of here. It's air reactive. So when you get a puncture in your tire that would normally let air out of it in a tubeless system, or in a tube system, the sealant is able to react with the air as the wheel spins. Ideally, it's going to plug that hole itself. So if you get a hole in a tubeless system that's a small enough hole, if you notice it spurting out fluid, like in that image of Danielle that I showed you guys earlier, where she kind of had some liquid coming out of her tire, the solution to that was we actually didn't even have to plug it. All we had to do was take her wheel and give it a spin. And we spun it really fast for a long time, and the sealant eventually found its way into the hole and it plugged itself. If the sealant's not able to plug it, we can use, instead of taking our tire all the way off on a tubeless system, if we act fast enough and if the hole is small enough, we can use that, I don't know where it went, but yeah, my little bacon strip kit or my dart kit, and I can grab a little bacon friend here and my little dart friend and be able to kind of take a bacon strip and just like plug the hole, or use my dart and plug the hole, and that'll help any bigger punctures that are still small enough to be able to fit one of these, but it doesn't work on big gashes, but it'll at least save the day in most cases. But in the case that doesn't work, or if we have tubes like me, because we haven't switched to tubeless yet. We're a lazy mechanic. We take our tire levers, and we want to if we have a stuck tire, we want to kind of the easiest way to kind of pop it off the edge is going to be using our body as a lever. I am a small person and I have small hands and they aren't the strongest in the world. And in bike shops, when I first got started, I felt like I couldn't do anything because I have small hands and I'm a small person that doesn't have very good upper body strength. And so I learned how to use my body as a lever, which is really, really important. I don't want to use tiny T-Rex hands and T-Rex arms. I want to use my body as a lever and be able to use my body weight and kind of, I would usually ideally have this tire on the ground so I can use my whole body weight to its best advantage. And I'm going to kind of get my hands on here and just really pop it off the side like this and as hard as I can, kind of like working my hands around it. Sometimes that's quite challenging. Sometimes it requires bigger hands. Sometimes it requires like really working at it. You're gonna sweat if it's a really tight tire. Sometimes having a little bit of, I found that like spraying some soap, or if you even have access to it, like if you have a spray bottle of soap, or even just like even like if you have a water bottle and just kind of spraying a little liquid on the edges, sometimes it seeps down in there enough to like get to be able to pop that bead off. But yeah, sometimes it's really challenging. And I haven't come across one that I haven't been able to get eventually, but you are gonna sweat sometimes out there. But hopefully it's easy and you have one that's like this and it basically just pops itself off. You can see the edge of our tire hanging out right there. I grab the scoop side of my tire lever and I catch it under there and just scoop down like that. And I want to catch just one side of my tire with one tire lever. I'm going to pretend this tire is quite tight like most of them are. This one's quite loose, but so I don't need to. But if it was tight, I'll get one tire lever in somewhere near a spoke. And then I'm going to count like maybe 2 or 3 fingers down and catch the other tire lever in. This is a method that's going to guarantee you can get your tire off every time once you've popped the bead off. So I have both my tire levers in here. I'm going to push them both down together and create a little lip. And then one of them I hook on a spoke. And the other one I have hanging out loose, kind of like this. I have them both angled down. And then I again use I want to angle it down so that I'm using my body weight. Ideally, if I had this on the ground, I would have it on the ground and be able to use my body weight to really force this tire to come off. But basically what I'm doing is unzipping it all the way around. Popping off that one side. And then once I've gotten off the one side, and I have one side hanging out and the other one still in my rim, I can lift up and pull the whole tire off, just like this. And once I have my tire off, I want to, probably before I took the tire off, I want to inspect my tire for what caused the flat. I want to look for anything obvious sticking out of there still and get that out before I go to any next steps. I don't actually cut myself with something quite sharp. I've had big nails or pieces of glass and stuff in there, and just make sure I get those out first. If I can't find what caused it, I'll pull my tubes out and just basically have it alongside my tire, and then I'm just going to pump up the tube and try and figure out where. I see a note in there. Are you starting opposite the valve? You are starting opposite the valve. I forgot to mention that. So I always want to remove my tire with my tire levers starting on the side opposite the valve, because I don't want to risk tearing my valve off when I go to remove my tire. That's a really good point that I usually make, and I forgot to say it because I'm a little bit nervous to be here on camera. And so trying to avoid doing anything to damage our valve is really important. The valve is the part that lets our air in and out of our tube, and if we accidentally rip it when we're pulling off our tire, then that can lead to bigger problems, and also makes it much harder to diagnose where the hole was. I always want to try to find where the hole is on my tube and match that up with a spot where the hole is on my tire, so that I can prevent that hole prevent that flat from recurring. I've had flats that happen here around the city when I'm working on clients' bikes or on my own bike that can be caused by very, very, very tiny things. It can be like the tiniest little single wire that has made its way through my tire into my tube and made the smallest hole that's almost impossible to see. And if I don't know where that wire is, if I don't know where the air is coming out, then basically it's really hard to be able to prevent that from happening again if I was to go put my new tube in. And I'm rambling a little bit, but yeah, so I want to basically pump this tube up I want to, so I would grab my hand pump and just be able to basically, yeah, I would then put it up to my ear and my cheek and listen and feel for any air coming out of my tube. Um, Paying attention to where I put my tire on the ground, making sure the place where the valve was at the top. So I remember where that was. And if I find the spot on my tube where the air is coming out, I can rotate it around, line it up with the spot on my tire, and be able to maybe, if I'm lucky, find that spot on my tire that has the hole in it. And I can look on the inside of my tire as well, turn it inside out, try to look for any holes or any sharp things on the inside. And try to diagnose if there's any obvious cuts and tears in the tube or in the tire, I mean, or if there's anything sticking through on this side, and feel around with my hand as well. If I can't find it, I'm going to thoroughly inspect it, kind of pinching the tire, rolling it in my hands. I'm going to run my hands on the inside and just really be really careful. And I see the notes about having a pen. Yeah, I also, if I have a marker, a Sharpie, or a pen with me, I'll circle that spot on the tube where the hole was so I don't lose it again. For some of us, myself included, I tend to, when I'm out on the trail during the day, I'm trying to make some mileage. I want to like get going. I don't want to sit and patch tubes while I'm on the trail. And so if the weather's bad, or if I'm in a little bit of a, if the weather's good, I'm like hanging out. It happened near to lunchtime. Folks are my friends are hanging out and we're having a good time. I'll take the time to patch my tube. But otherwise, I might grab that spare that I had in my bag. I'd install the spare tube and save the punctured one as a backup for later. I don't want to throw it away just in case I need to patch it and use it again later. But I might just throw in the new tube for now, save some time, and maybe camp that night, or if I need it in the future, I might patch it then. That's kind of just my general MO for how I operate. It's all about kind of just making it as easy for myself as possible, and then dealing with the consequences later if that happens to me. But yeah, I'll find my hole. I'll either patch it. I'll remove whatever the thing was that caused the flat if it's still in there. I'll diagnose if the hole is bigger than 3 millimeters. Again, that means I need to put a boot on the inside to make sure that my tube can't pop through the tire. And then I will either patch the tube or replace the tube with a fresh one. And once I've done that, and I've made sure that everything is clear and there's no debris or anything in my tire, I'll also inspect my rim, make sure my rim tape, in this case cloth rim tape, make sure it's intact and covering all of my spoke holes. I saw some notes in the chat about snake bite punctures, and yes, if I can't find the thing that caused my puncture, and or an easy way to tell if it's a snake bite is if there's two holes. That's why we call it a snake bite puncture, is if I have two holes next to each other on my tube. What that means is that I have gotten a pinch flat, which means that there wasn't something on the outside that caused my flat. There was basically the tube itself. If I had too low of tire pressure or I hit some kind of hard bump in the road, the tube was able to wiggle out and it got pinched by the edge of my tire inside the rim, and that's what caused my flat. And so I don't have to worry about finding debris in my tire. I just want to make sure that either patch those two holes and cover them thoroughly with a patch, or replace that tube and make sure that I do better next time, making sure my tire pressure is high enough. Yeah, it's making sure that my rim tape's intact is really important, especially for tubeless setups. If we're trying to reinstall a tubeless tape, which we usually wouldn't, reinstall a tubeless setup, which we usually wouldn't do on the trail, but if we have the ability to do that, some people will bring extra sealant with them, and they have a way with their the CO2 cartridges and stuff to kind of pop a tire back on there. If you know how to do that, that's more power to you. That's amazing. We love that. Make sure that tubeless tape is intact and there's basically none of it's peeled up on the edges. So that can also cause a flat. And then once we're all set with that, I'm gonna put my tube back into my tire. I usually inflate it a little bit because when it's totally fresh and new and flat, it's like a big floppy noodle, and it's really hard to make a noodle into a circle. It's really kind of a pain in the butt. And so instead of making a noodle into a circle, I make a circle into a circle, and I'll pump my tube up until it's round again. Doesn't have to be a ton of pumps, usually just a few. And then I'm going to put it back in my tire. If I want to be really fancy, which I usually do, I like to line my valve up with the label on my tire. Not only does that look nice and legit, it also gives me all the information really easily. Whenever I got to pump that I need to have for air pressure and stuff, whenever I need to pump my tire up. Additionally, it makes it really easy when I put my tire down to go find my rim. I can always find where the valve was. I don't have to go looking around for it because I know that it's lined up with my label. And I also noticed as I'm going through here, this tire actually has a boot in it. So I'll show you what that looks like. I have a lovely little Park Tool boot on the inside of this tire. I'd forgotten I did have a big hole on the side of it where I got a nail that went through it. And so it's kind of just interesting. I've been riding on this now for probably, I forgot it was there. So yeah, boots work great. They'll cover up the holes in your tire, and they can last for a long time, whether you use a proper boot from a repair manufacturer or you can use Gorilla Tape, and they'll last as long as they last. Eventually your tire will start to bulge in that spot, and you really want to make sure you get that replaced as soon as possible. But it's kind of just interesting that was in here. Make sure my tube is in there. My tube's in the tire without any lumps or folds or twists in it. Another method that is important, if the tire is a folding bead tire, like this one actually, it's probably good to show y'all. I'll usually put it on the rim first before putting my tube inside of it. So I put my tire lining up my valve hole with my label. I'll put it in my rim first. And just like I took one side off first, I put one side back on first onto my rim, all the way around. And then pop it back in. And then I'll put my tube inside the tire. And sometimes that helps us when we have kind of bigger tires or ones that are kind of floppy. And then I put my valve hole into the valve, or my valve into the valve hole, and then tuck my tube in all the way around. Make sure my valve is sitting in there straight. I want to make sure that it's not off at an angle. So I'll kind of peel my tire back and make sure everything's in there straight, and then start tucking, starting from the top and at the valve, and working my hands around until I get to the bottom, and then I'll flip it. Usually our tires are not super difficult to install the second side most of the way around. It's kind of just tuck it right in, make sure everything is nice and straight. When I get to those last 6 to 12 inches or so, life gets a little bit harder, and this is where folks get hung up. And this is why part of the main reason I think a lot of us have probably changed flats before. Many of us have gotten to this point and then been very hung up. There's a few different methods. There's some notes about you make that look easy. This is an easy tire, but also I've done this hundreds of times. But yeah, when we get to those last 6 to 12 inches, life gets hard. And when that happens, there's a few methods to make it easier. And this is why the main reason I wanted to show you guys flat fixing was not just me rambling, but showing you a couple tips and tricks that I've learned as someone with small hands and no upper body strength, how I like to get tires on a regular basis. And one of those methods, there's 2 different tricks 3 tricks I use to help. The first one is I want to make sure that all of the air is out of my tube. I inflated it slightly to get it onto the rim initially and get it into the tire, but once I have it on there, I want to deflate it all the way. So I'm going to use the valve. This is the Schrader valve because 90s bike, most of you are probably going to have Presta. It's easier than this. Squeeze that tire, deflate all the air out of that tube. Step 2, our rims are shaped like an upside down bell curve. So the inner part of our tire is going to be a smaller circumference because it's lower down in the middle than the edges that on a tubeless ready rim are going to be kind of up on the edge. On this one, it also has a little bit of an edge where the bead sets. And I want to make sure that starting at the valve, I'm going to wiggle my tire, both kind of wiggle it down into the middle of that groove in my rim, but also be pushing it towards that side down here that still has not popped into my rim. And kind of wiggling it both to the middle and pushing it down. And then I flip it around. And now it's already fitting a lot looser because of those 2 things I did. And now I'm here at the top again, but life is, let's say that the tire is still really stuck and it's hard. This is where my body as a lever comes into play again. So I don't want to have little T-Rex arms kind of sitting, a lot of people will sit on the ground or crouch on the ground, kind of like trying to work on it, like we're Golem with the ring, kind of like crouch down like this. I want to stand up. I want to be big like I would with a bear or with my life. I want to be kind of taking it by charge. I want to use my body as a lever. And I'll usually kind of use, my hands are dirty from this tire, but this is what happens as a mechanic, but I want to use these knuckles. So I'm not, some people will use their fingers or thumbs with it, but I find that like these knuckles help a lot. And I'm kind of just like pulling it back. And I start from the edge and I'm going to kind of work my way to the middle, kind of just as one big motion, like pulling like this, until it pops into place. if like right now it's kind of unzipping itself as I go a little bit. I might put it in my knees a little. So if I had it on the ground, I don't know if I can show you guys this very easily, but I might pinch it in my knees like this as I go, and then kind of do my rolling onto the side, and that prevents it from unzipping itself. But I basically, if I don't need to do that, or I can use a volley strap as well to hold it in place. If I have a volley strap, I love these things so much. I can always carry an extra 2 or 3 of them on my rides with me. I can do the same thing and hold it in place with the volley. But instead, in this case, I can probably just kind of pop it in like that. I want to avoid using those tire levers to put my tire back on when possible. They're great for taking it off. For putting it back on, they're always run a risk of pinching the inner tube on the inside, and then you have to do all that work again. So try to do it by hand if possible. If you really, really need to use it and you're having the worst time ever, they are a lifesaver. So if you need to get that little edge back over, let's say there was still this little edge and I really couldn't get it, I use the scoop side like I'm eating to get the tire off. I turn it upside down and have it hook onto the rim when I'm trying to get it back on. So it's gonna look like this hooked onto my rim, and I pop it on like that. And that's a great way to kind of, and I would like work my way along to pop the tire back onto the rim if I really, really, really needed to and I was stuck. But there is always a risk of it pinching the tube if you do that. So that's kind of my general fixing of flat. I would then inflate my tire and call it a day. I'm not going to go over patching today because patch kits have instructions in them. Tubes usually don't have instructions on them. Patch kits are great if you need them, and they're a great way to like save on space and not carry a bunch of tubes with you. But that's kind of general flat fixing. That's kind of the first thing we run into on the trail. I guess the next thing I want to talk about is fixing a broken chain. And yeah, I don't know if they probably aren't. Yeah, do you want to go over questions for the flat fixing before we go into chain stuff? I've been talking for a while, and I want to give a little bit of a break, I guess, if there are any questions about what I just went over with flats. Now that my hands are covered in grease.
There are a couple questions kind of related to flats. One would be, do you have any tips on managing tire inserts, like flats with tire inserts while out bikepacking?
They're harder. Yeah, they're gonna be harder. I'm sorry. Yeah, I hope that ideally you won't get any flats when you have the tire inserts because it's hard. It's gonna be a similar process to what I just did, just harder. Yeah. Yeah, that's the main thing I have to say about it. Yeah, it's harder to get the tires on, it's harder to get them off. That's all I know about that, I guess.
Totally.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Hopefully you don't.
Yeah, it seems like one of those things where hopefully it just prevents the problem.
Yeah.
And then someone is wondering, in your opinion, what are the best patch kits?
Yeah, I think the Rima rim top ones are my favorites. They're the ones that are teal. You get them at your local bike shop. I found that these are the most reliable. They're awesome. They every single time I pretty much get them on the first try. Some other brands I don't have that experience, so I love these. Yeah.
Nice. Oh, this is a good one. Any tips for separating your brake pads? This is, I guess, kind of similar to fixing a flat in the sense that you're removing a wheel, but separating your brake pads, if you pull the lever, this would be disc brakes, when tires are off.
Yeah.
Those are.
Having I guess a clean flathead screwdriver is part of one of your multi-tools is going to be your friend. So there's like this little Park Tool one has one. And if you can just kind of wedge that between your brake pads and press them out. Make sure that the tool is clean, and make sure you're not scraping the pads and hopefully not damaging them, but that's going to be probably the easiest way to get them apart again, because you kind of get it between the pads and just like, I have an example just right here, but you can kind of just like press them apart. This is a problem that only happens on hydraulic brakes. And I didn't talk about hydraulic brakes yet. I think that's one of the next things on my list as well. But I actually, for bike packing, I tend to recommend avoiding them if you're going on any kind of longer trip. I'm a very analog kind of person for bikes. And I love the feel of hydraulic disc brakes. They feel wonderful. They're easy to use. They don't require adjustment. They're great But if they have bigger and then people might disagree with me, that's 100% fine. We can talk about it in the chat. We can hash it out. But I tend to be a mechanical disc brake person because they're easy to repair fully in the field. I saw some questions in the initial Q&A kind of thing when you guys were registering about how to do field brake bleeds. We can't. Like, there's not a great way to do that. And so making sure that we're using kit on our bike that we know how to repair ourselves while we're out there in the wilderness is really important to me, at least personally. So I always will use mechanical kit fully on my bike. Just to make sure that I can repair stuff. Yeah, so I don't tend to run into problems like that with having to press my brakes out because I tend to use mechanical ones. And I love the TRP Spires myself. That's my favorite one to use because they're super adjustable and they have a really nice brake feel. They are, yeah, and they basically, you can really fine tune the adjustments with an easy. I use BB7 I like the BB7s too. BB7s are unique BB7s are not unique because almost every cheaper disc brake uses an awkward one-handed clap as the style of the brakes work. And so when you squeeze your brakes on the BB7s or most other cheaper brakes, only one, you can't really see it on this, but only one side of our brake is coming in to meet the middle. My hands are so dirty right now. But yeah, only one side of our brake is coming in to meet in the middle. On the Spires and a couple other similar mechanical brakes like these, both sides come in to meet in the middle when I squeeze my brakes. You can't really see it on the video, but and so basically they have a nicer brake feel. You can adjust them really easily, and they kind of just are a little more reliable than I found than others. But I also love BB7s. These just are, I like these. But yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents on brakes.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Well, I think we're at
Yeah.
the half hour now, so I'm wondering if maybe we can end these questions. Is there anything you want to wrap up with?
Yeah, I guess I know that we ran a little bit late with some of the other topics, and I apologize. I guess other things that are important to know, yeah, if we have a chain breaker, knowing how to use it. So I guess general chain care. If our chain breaks, we want to have a chain breaker and a little quick link in our kit, and we can basically cut out the broken link using our chain breaker. And kind of just be able to put our chain in the chain breaker and just can push a pin out of the middle, kind of like this, making sure that everything is lined up correctly. And it pushes our pin right out. We can cut out that broken link. And then quick links are kind of a handy tool that is basically able to replace that broken link. And so they fit in to each other. There's little slots in the quick link, and they basically you put some pressure on them. Usually, if I was to install them on my bike, I could put some pressure on the chain pedaling forward while using the back brake, and they'll pop into place. And there's tutorials for how to do this online. I'm so sorry I ran out of time. I was hoping to go over more of this, but I got very, very wordsy about some of the earlier topics. But yeah, quick links are amazing to have with us. So is a chain breaker if we have a broken chain on the field. If we're keeping on top of our chain wear, hopefully it's not going to break on us, but sometimes weird stuff happens. And then I guess like other things I had on my list for common problems we might run into: broken spokes. Knowing how to use a spoke wrench and having one with us that fits the size of our spokes on our bike is really important. Spoke wrenches fit onto our spoke nipples, which is the part that our spoke is threaded into on our at our rim. And so the idea is that it fits on there. The way that I can tell which direction to turn our spoke nipple to tighten or loosen a spoke is if I imagine turning it in from the top of our wheel, which is where the nipple itself is threaded in. And if I was using like a screwdriver on the top, from the top down, right tightens, left loosens. So if I have my spoke wrench on here and I'm looking from the top, pretending that I'm turning from the top instead of from the bottom, and I turn it to the right from the top, that tightens, turn it to the left from the top, that loosens. And that's kind of the easiest way to remember which way to turn it to tighten or loosen a spoke. The more I tighten the spoke, our spokes come from different sides of our hub. So I tighten the spoke that comes from, let's say this side of my hub. It's going to, if I tighten that spoke, it shortens that spoke a little bit, and it's going to pull my rim a little bit this way. If I loosen that spoke, it's going to, from this side of my hub, it's going to relax my rim a little bit the opposite direction, and kind of push it a little bit away. And so I want to balance my rim out. If I ever have a wobble in my rim, or I have a broken spoke, or if I have a wobble in my rim ever, I want to tighten. Basically, if I have a little divot going this way, I would loosen the spoke on this side and tighten the one on the other side to relax my rim and pull my rim to the other direction on that spot where I have that wobble in my rim going this way. If I have a broken spoke, and some people will carry spare spokes with them. I tend to not, just because our wheels will often have different lengths of spokes. So especially on disc brake wheels or a lot of modern wheels, we might have 3 or 4 different lengths of spokes on our bikes. And some of them are kind of similar lengths, but it's still, I might bring one spare length spoke that kind of is an average of all of them. But I'm not going to bring 4 different spokes with me. So I might bring one spoke, and I might bring, there's a really cool kit. It's made by a company called Fiberfix, I think. That's kind of like a fabric spoke that essentially you can like thread into where the broken spoke came out, and then be able to kind of tension it on both sides and pull our rim back to straight as needed. Another method could be if you break a spoke and you just need to get to town, you can kind of true your wheel, pretending that spoke isn't, with the spoke not there, you can true the wheel around that dead spot, and bring it back to at least straighten out that it's not hitting your frame, and be able to get yourself to town and get yourself taken care of. I'll zip tie, if I can't get the old spoke out, I'll use one of those zip ties and I'll zip tie it to its buddy. Make sure it doesn't hit my frame and or twist it around it. Just make sure it kind of stays in place and doesn't hit stuff. That's kind of general spoke repair. Other things that were on my list were like bent derailleur hangers. I'm just kind of going through this really quickly because I apologize for running a little bit late. But usually, if I have my bike well adjusted at the start of a tour, and I've gotten my tune up, I've gotten everything mechanically set up, the only thing that should go wrong with my shifting is, if I don't have anything catastrophic happening, might be tightening up my cable a little bit. Let's say it's having trouble shifting into my lower gears. Give that cable a little bit of a tightening, up at the barrel adjuster. It's a little adjustment knob on my lever. Up here, I have a little knob, so I can extend that. Oops, here we go. A little knob. The more I extend it out, I'm going counterclockwise, the tighter it makes my cable. My derailleur might also have one on it as well. And so the more I extend it out, the tighter it makes my cable. If my bike has fallen over or crashed, there's a chance that I have a bent derailleur hanger. And that's a part on our bike that looks like this. And it is what holds our derailleur onto the back of our bike. And so we want to make sure when I'm diagnosing a bike after a crash, the first thing I want to check is my hanger alignment. So I'll stand behind my bike and just make sure my hanger is looking nice and straight in a nice straight line. If it ever looks bent to the side, then I want to take a pause and basically try to check if it's cracked at all. You can look really carefully at the hanger and see if I see any hairline cracks on it. If it is, I want to try to get myself to town and get that taken care of, and try to not ride my bike, because if it is cracked or if it is breaking off, then if I try to ride my bike, the rest of it can break off and it can damage the whole back end of my bike. If it's not too bad and it's a little bit bent, I can try to use in a pinch, I can try to use my multi-tool, and use the number 5 wrench on there. I can put it into the hole that my derailleur is bolted into, and try to kind of manually pry that hanger back to straight. This is an emergency fix, and I would not recommend doing that. It's something that is like an emergency thing to get us out of a bad situation. We want to avoid putting a lot of pressure on the derailleur on our bike, because it can, if we're just pulling on the derailleur itself, you can damage the rivets of our derailleur, and make the whole derailleur slack and like loose, and it doesn't work anymore, and you'll have to replace the derailleur. So I want to try to put most of the pressure kind of supporting the derailleur from the back, use my multi-tool, and can kind of put the multi-tool into place and just like try to bend it to straight if I can. Often that doesn't work, sometimes it does. You can at least get it straight enough to ride. Either way, if it's still looking a little bit bent, I want to avoid using my 2 to 3 lowest gears on the bike. So lowest gears are those biggest rings on the cassette. when I shift into these lowest gears, that's getting our derailleur dangerously close to our spokes. And what can happen is if the derailleur hanger is bent, your derailleur can get caught in your spokes. If you ever had a friend or it happened to you where your derailleur has ripped off the back, it's because your derailleur hanger was bent or it was probably adjusted and it got stuck in your spokes. And as your wheel was rotating, just ripped the whole thing off. So if you have a bent derailleur hanger, you need to stay in your higher gears to avoid having that happen to you. And that you should be able to get off the trail and get to somewhere safe and get to a shop that can help you out and have the proper tool to be able to straighten it back out again. If that happens to you. And I see a note about asking if we can put the wheel back on. Yeah, let's do it. I'm going to quickly do that and then we can wrap up. I'm going to basically pull my derailleur back again to create some slack and get a nice straight line. I guide my wheel in, focusing first on the derailleur. I'm going to get onto my smallest cog that I can still have it shifted into my smallest gear, and then roll my wheel up into the dropouts. If I had a disc brake, once I got it past the derailleur, I would also pay attention at that point to my disc brakes and make sure that the rotor goes into the pads nice and clear, and then I would tighten up my wheel. And I see that Kate's back on, which probably means I need to wrap up. Yeah, we talked about a lot of things. That's kind of the main things that I have on my list. We didn't get a chance to talk about brake pads too much and brake noise, but yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to I guess reach out, and I'm always happy to be a resource. I offer virtual consultations through Upshift, and otherwise maybe we could do some more workshops. I'll definitely be hosting some more in person here in DC over the next few months, and if you guys are in the area, you're welcome to come.
Awesome. It looks like you answered pretty much all the questions too, naturally, which is amazing.
I did read them ahead of time, so.
True. Awesome. Thank you so much. That was amazing, and so much great information packed into a very short amount of time and complete with live
usually I try and
demos.
give 2 hours for
From live from your kitchen. Thank you so much, Leah. Thank you everyone for coming. We will be following up with just a wrap up of this whole workshop series, and we'll be sure to include Leah's resources for how you can get in touch with her or get maybe some in-person coaching through Upshift workshop or more virtual. It's the new age.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure, and always happy to share knowledge and just kind of break down the stuff that might be hidden behind a mechanic counter typically. It's stuff that I'm really passionate about. Knowing how to care for our bikes makes us feel so much more confident getting out on the trail and maybe attempting a bigger adventure. If we feel confident in our ability to take care of our bike and not be worried that we're going to be stranded out there, we're more confident and able to get out there and do some rad stuff.
Yeah, it's a huge, I think for a lot of people, myself included, it's a barrier to a lot of people feeling confident being out self-sufficient bikepacking. So it's a great way to wrap up. And for those asking about the recording, because there is a lot to digest, and if you want to go back and watch Leah demo any of these skills, then that will get emailed out from Noelle within the next week. So along with all the other recordings. So yes, you will get to rewatch, and do read the chat. There were a lot of amazing tips and additions and comments and questions answered. So yeah, thank you all so much. Have a great night.
Awesome. Thank you.